In the Victorian era, Britain changed as never before. It was the time of great inventors, great engineers, but above all, great businessmen, entrepreneurs. And one of the best examples was the pioneer photographer, Franics Frith. It was in the 1860s that Franics Frith embarked upon a monumental mission using the newly invented photographic camera. He wanted to document every city, every town, and every village in the land. I'm tracing the footsteps of this remarkable man and his team of photographers. Using their pictures as my guide, I'll be travelling the length and breadth of the country, finding out what has altered and what has stayed the same. And along the way, I'll be taking my own photos to try and capture the mood of the place as it is now.
That's great.
Welcome to Britain's first photo album. In 1860, Franics Frith founded the first specialist photographic printing business. The idea was to sell photographic prints to the public when it was very unusual for someone to have the money to pay for those expensive early cameras. Using the Frith photos as a guide, I'm travelling today to Reigate in Surrey. Then I'll be going south to the medieval town of Rye before heading further east to Hythe on the South Kent coast. En route, I'll be visiting a very unusual church, finding out where a notorious gang of smugglers hid their contraband, and I'm shooting a musket, as they did at the Battle of Waterloo. Cool. That's something, isn't it? My first port of call is to an area Frith would have known well, the South Downs outside Reigate. Frith lived in the town for most of his life. The photo that's brought me here is of the Reigate Hythe windmill, and it was taken in 1894. The windmill is still one of the most famous landmarks in the area today, and when the Frith team took this photograph, it had embarked upon a new chapter in its history. I'm meeting the Reverend David Bull to find out more.
For 100 years, it operated as a normal mill, and all the workings are still up there now. But then, 100 years after it was built, its purpose changed.
Oh, right. OK. Oh, this is tremendous, isn't it? Oh, gosh. Now, this is a chapel?
It is. It's the only windmill church in the country.
And why was it stopped from being a windmill?
Well, by about 1870, there was no need for the mill anymore. It had ceased being used as a mill, and the local landowner had a close relative who was in the ministry, who was working for the church, and so he decided to turn it into a chapel for his relative to come and exercise his ministry here.
And it still goes on? You still hold services?
As we have services here monthly, yes.
And you can still see, well, the old mechanism. What are these beams doing?
You know, these are all the original beams, and these sort of anchor the mill to the ground. The upper section above where we are here would have rotated so that the sails of the windmill could be turned to the wind. And this big post you can see here takes the whole weight of the upper section of the mill.
Right, but of course it makes it hard sometimes for your congregation, I suppose.
It does, yes. We sometimes wonder if we should hand out crash helmets.
Beware of low beams, you've got that.
At the start of every hymn, I have to warn people not to hit their heads as they stand up to sing.
Now, when was it consecrated?
Well, it was on September the 14th, 1880. We still have here the original sermon that was preached on that first day.
Is it a good sermon?
Well, and better than most of mine, I think. But there's one bit that sounds quite contemporary, I think. I'll read you a bit. Our whole life seems to be spent in a hurry. Men are hurrying after business, pleasure, riches, fame, and they seek shortcuts for everything. And this loss of calmness is in some sense bad for the spiritual life.
Oh, yes. Well, that's good sound stuff. My father was a vicar, so I can imagine him agreeing with that. So Frith would have known when this opens a chapel that was of great interest, and he might sell a lot of photographs as a result. I want to take my own modern-day photograph of this fascinating building. I'm going to be getting some expert advice from John Gall of the Reigate Photographic Society. Tell me how to take an interesting photograph.
OK, well, what you're looking for is something that will tell a story, something of interest. From here, you can either get a silhouette of the windmill against the sky, or around the other side, there's the evening light coming onto the windmill, which would make it more interesting, perhaps.
OK, so the lighting's incredibly important.
Very much.
What also about just the... I don't know, we've got to have people, haven't we?
People give interest to a photograph, but they're not essential. You need a point of interest, and a person does give a human dimension to a photograph.
So what can we see from the photo about the skill of the photographer?
Right, well, what they're doing here, the photographer is leading you through from left to right as we read, taking you quickly through the photograph to the key points of interest. If you divide the photograph into thirds, horizontally and vertically, a composition technique is to place key elements on those third intersections, the house and the girl. The photographer's telling a story, so you've got to get into the mind of the photographer. What was he actually trying to tell in taking that photograph?
So taking a good photo can be a way of telling a good story, something that Frith and his team often set out to do. And that's what I want to do today. David has agreed to provide the vital human interest, the Windmill Church with its curate.
You just, right, wording. Right, you don't have to smile too much. Right, that's great. That's wonderful.
And here's my photo. David standing proudly in front of what is a unique place of worship.
What I've tried to do is to draw the viewer in. So that's the point where you're meant to start, and you're meant to think, oh, that's interesting, a clergyman and a windmill, and then you're meant to be drawn up the stairs and thinking, and what's in the windmill? So there's a sense of mystery, I hope, in this picture. It's meant to be. Well, I might get better.
For my next Frith photo, I'm going into Reigate. It's a town where Frith and his team took hundreds of pictures. Some of the scenes they captured remain to the present day, but much has gone forever. The photo that's caught my attention is very personal to Frith himself, because the great man's in it. This photograph was taken around 1885 and shows Frith relaxing at Brightlands, his home here in Reigate.
Francis Frith was a local celebrity in the 19th century, but what sort of man was he? What drove him?
To find out, I'm meeting an expert on Francis Frith, local historian Sean Hawkins.
He was a very interesting man. He was a Quaker businessman, a very, very individual, very strong man who had been very successful in business. By the time he was 33, he'd made a lot of money, and he then became interested in a career, I think, connected with a very, very strong passion, a hobby, photography. And he explored the possibility of going abroad and taking photographs in the Holy Land and in Egypt.
So his first sort of commercial photographs, because they did become commercial, were done abroad.
Yes, they were.
The pictures Frith took in Egypt and the Middle East quickly established his reputation as a pioneer photographer. But after his marriage, Frith decided to stop going abroad and start on an epic photographic record of Britain.
I think probably his major sales were souvenir pictures, which people could buy and paste in their albums, or later on in the century, they could buy something like this, which was on sale in all stationers and souvenir shops. And these were very, very popular indeed.
Initially, Frith took all his photographs himself, but as success came, he began to hire local photographers across the country. He set about establishing what quickly became one of the largest photographic publishers in the world, with over 2,000 shops in Britain selling his photos and albums.
Now this, we think, is Frith himself, and we think this is him in Reigate, here in Reigate.
Well, the house isn't there now, but we have got something that we can show you that still is evidence of the house.
Oh, right, OK. So, is it going to be difficult to find?
No, I hope not.
So Frith's house, as it appears in our photo, is no more. What's here instead?
So this is the site where the house was that Frith lived with his family.
Yes, this is the site,
But not the house.
but not the very house.
No, because this is what? How new is this?
Built about 1970.
Right. But we do know definitely that he was here.
We know definitely this is the site of the house.
A modern family house is now on the spot where Brightlands stood.
Oh, this is nice. Touch of California.
The current owner, Caroline Patterson, shows me the remains of Frith's home.
Lovely garden, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Did you know that the famous Victorian photographer, Francis Frith, lived in a house on this site?
I was aware of it because
Yeah.
I knew there was a large house on this site. Sadly, there isn't very much left other than the swimming pool, which was built in the foundations of the cellar of the house.
Right.
And, in fact, the bay windows form the side of this pool.
Oh, right.
We wondered why it was a bit unusual shape.
So we know that Frith will have walked into the swimming pool.
Frith once said that his life only really began after his wedding day, and although he travelled a lot, his home at Brightlands always had a very special place in his heart. The great man and his house have gone forever, but with the help of Caroline, I can try to take a photograph in the spirit of Frith, a person and a house.
You just have to look wonderful there.
Thank you.
Oh, that looks good. All right, big smile, that's good.
OK.
And here's my photo, blue and bright and modern.
My picture has got the new owner, Caroline, and Johnny Nice Shears, kind of, well, demonstrating, I suppose, what's changed, how much has changed from the Victorian idea of the formal garden to this touch of California.
I'm tracing the footsteps of pioneer photographer Francis Frith and his team, using the photographs they took in order to find out exactly how our country has changed. My next port of call takes me to East Sussex.
My road trip is now really getting underway. The Frith photos always tell a story. It's just a matter of working out what that story is. Well, I'm off to Rye now in Sussex to see another great example of their work. And I must say, I'm really enjoying the ride.
The picturesque town of Rye now lies about 2 miles inland from the English Channel. But in medieval times, this part of the Sussex coast looked quite different. Rye was almost entirely surrounded by water. Frith and his team took a number of photos in Rye, but the one I'm going to look at is this one, of a 2-masted trading ship sitting in Rye Harbour. I think it's a perfect testament to this little town's colourful history, both as a major trading port and in the 18th and 19th centuries as a renowned haven for smuggling. To find out more, I'm meeting local historian and guide Jane Fraser-Hay.
On the Frith photograph, what we did see was its importance as a port. But when people talk about Rye now, they don't say, oh, that's the famous port of Rye, do they?
What you see in the Frith photograph is the last days, really, of Rye as an important port.
And what went wrong?
Well, the sea giveth and it taketh away, I'm afraid. It receded and left us with a very, well, limited facilities here as a port eventually.
So the story of Rye is a story of the disappearing sea.
I'm afraid it is.
It had always been difficult to get to Rye by land over the marshes, and from the 17th century onwards, as the harbour started disappearing under layers of silt from the river Rother, the town became increasingly isolated.
The sea now is, what, 2 or 3 miles away?
It's about 2.5 miles from where we're standing, yes.
This is also an area where there was a lot of smuggling.
Oh, yes, you bet there was. I should say towards the end of the 1700s, lots of valuable goods coming, particularly from Java, the spices and that sort of thing. The tea from the Far East, not India, that was much later, but coming vast distances.
So dear old, gentle, genteel Rye was in fact a hotbed of smugglers.
Well, it's a root and toot and port.
Smuggling along England's coastline reached astonishing levels in the 18th century. Owlers, as the nocturnal smugglers were known, tried to avoid tax on imported goods and wool exports. Rye's economy was soon taken over by the illegal trade. Small smugglers' vessels would travel up the river and unload their contraband virtually on the doorsteps of the local inns.
How many of the people in the town were involved in this trade?
We don't have exact numbers, obviously, because it was a hugely secret trade.
Yes.
But I imagine quite a number
Yes.
wouldn't have any conscience about being involved.
And when they got the smuggled goods here, what did they do with them?
They would hide them, probably for instance, up in these houses in the attics. All the doors were unlocked, and they would make a run for people trying to escape from the revenue.
Right.
They would go sometimes halfway around the town and come down the stairs in a completely different area.
Right, just to
Yes.
escape the revenue.
They would be after them all the time.
Yeah.
But the poor revenue men, there was very small numbers of them and huge numbers of smugglers.
And it wasn't only in the attics the smugglers stored their contraband. Hidden tunnels and secret cellars were not uncommon, and one of them survives to this day under the White Vine Hotel. Javid Khan is the present owner.
Under here, John, is a cellar which actually dates from approximately 1340.
And can we look in here?
We can indeed. If I can just get you to give me a hand with the rug.
Yeah. Right.
Just roll it back.
Right. This looks good. Shall I help? Or would it not
Please,
help?
it's a heavy trapdoor.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Oh, right. Aladdin's cave.
Ideal for storage or hiding.
Or hiding. Right. So we could be talking about smugglers using this cellar.
We don't know for sure, and it
Right.
is well hidden.
OK, you go first. You notice I say you go first. Yeah. OK.
And mind your head, because they were a lot shorter in those days. And down into the medieval cellar.
We've got the genuine smell of the cellar, haven't we?
We have absolutely indeed.
Yeah. Cobwebs. You pay extra for those. It's big, isn't it? It's actually big.
It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's a lot bigger than it looks.
And how many cellars are there like this in Rye?
We think probably about 12 or 13.
Yes.
This is probably one of the better ones, given its age,
Yeah.
in terms of its condition.
You just wonder what happened here, though. It's got all the atmosphere, isn't it?
You could almost imagine smugglers making their plans and counting their loot. The cellar actually continues through here.
Yeah.
This is now a bricked-up chute. Well, we'd imagine that barrels, goods, contraband maybe, would have been just slid down and taken to the back of the cellar.
Well, that's fascinating.
Just imagine all the booty stashed away in these dark cellars. Having been below ground, I'm off to get a bird's eye view. At the Heritage Centre, Peter Kostick has an impressive exhibit.
What a marvellous model.
It's something we're incredibly proud of. This shows you Rye, how it looked in Victorian times, and it's not changed much today.
We're always being told about smuggling in Rye.
Yeah, yeah.
Was it all over the place? Was it riddling the whole
It
town?
was indeed, it was indeed. There was a notorious smuggling gang called the Hawkhurst Gang, and when they were in town, their headquarters was at the Mermaid Inn.
Right.
They were ruthless, and there was very little law and order, and they ruled the roost. And it was only much later, when we hit Victorian times, that smuggling really died out. Because of the Victorian values, smuggling was frowned on.
But also, they chopped off the taxes, didn't they? So
They
it
did
wasn't
indeed.
so expensive
Yeah.
to import wine and brandy.
Yes.
So they were done out of business, weren't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
What's striking now is just how many of these buildings still exist.
Yes, yeah.
And how attractive they are, aren't they?
Yeah, they're very, very well.
It was a very prosperous place. And of course, it's so little change from the time of our Frith photograph. And I think we should be able to line it up. What's that?
That's a hotel now. That's the Hope Anchor, which is just there.
Right, so that's there. And the boat, well, it would have been here, wouldn't it?
That's about right, John, yep.
It's rather sad because you feel that is the end of an era there, isn't it? That's when all the whole shipping trade round here, it's just slightly sad.
It is.
I'm off to Rye Harbour, to the spot that Peter's helped me pinpoint, and maybe to take my photo.
This is the Frith photo, and these two buildings are still there. You can see them. There's the Hope Anchor Hotel and the other building on the other side, but there's no boat here. So I think my picture should be just a bit further down.
All I need to do is to find a view with a boat that somehow inspires me.
This is going to be my shot. I like it because there are still ships, still sailing ships in Rye. All right, they're pleasure boats, but they're jolly nice.
And here it is, a boat bathed in colour as the sun sets over Rye.
It makes a sort of contrast with the Frith picture, but both are at low tide, and both really tell the same story about Rye, which is that this is a tidal river and it's now a long way from the sea. So there's a sort of slightly sad air. Not just the end of an era here, but there's also a sense of, well, this is just a pleasure boat. It's not the same.
And now I'm travelling further east along the coast and into Kent. I'm heading for Hythe, and the photo taking me there is this one from 1890 of the Hythe Musketry School.
Now I'm told that it's in this area and I've got to park here. Okay. I have to say it doesn't look at all promising.
But there's absolutely no sign of the long row of old buildings in the photo.
This is just an ordinary supermarket car park. Oh well, I'm sure it will work itself out. I'm sure we will resolve it. We will settle the mystery.
I've been instructed to head for the military canal, where I'm meeting local historian Michael George to find out what's happened to this curious building.
Well, now you're going to help me solve the mystery, aren't you?
I am, I hope, yes.
Thanks very much. Now look, that's our picture.
Well, these buildings no longer exist, and instead you've got the supermarket.
Yeah.
They were military barracks.
Yes, military barracks.
Yes, they were. They were originally built 200 years ago, at the time of the threatened invasion by Napoleon of England. Hythe Bay provides a natural anchorage. It was a perfect landing place for anybody who had hankerings to invade England.
Right, so the French are across the channel.
They are.
They are genuinely threatening invasion, aren't they?
There are 200,000 French troops camped over there, waiting just for the right weather conditions to arrive en masse on the beaches of Hythe.
It's stirring to think of our brave boys standing up against the imperial might of Napoleon's France. But the invasion never came. Napoleon turned his attention to campaigns in Egypt and Austria.
At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the barracks fell into disuse. They were surplus to requirements until 1853. The rifle has been introduced, and the rifle is a much more accurate weapon. And you now need to train your soldiers in how to use it. And Lord Harginge decided that we needed a school to train soldiers who would then go back to their regiments and they would train the men in their regiments. That was the beginning of the residence in Hythe of the School of Musketry.
In the 20th century, the school served as a training base through both World Wars. But in the 1960s, it was moved from Hythe to Warminster, where the present-day school still trains the soldiers of the British Army.
And all that remains of the Hythe School of Musketry is this plaque in the wall of the supermarket. And it says that 88,000 men were trained here in the history of the school, which was from 1853 until 1968.
It's surprising to find that the site of a top military academy is now a car park. But at least one part of the old musketry school survives. The firing ranges nearby are more than 200 years old, but they're still run by the Ministry of Defence. A fine ex-soldier, Ian Bull, known as Bully, gave me a taste of the target practice which for years sustained the British Army.
This, for you, it's a kind of family business, isn't it?
Yeah, shooting or soldiering. Yeah, a bit of both.
How long does it go back in your family?
5 generations, goes back before the Boer War. We had one killed in the Boer War, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Five generations?
Yeah, my son's in the army now. I was in the army, my father was in the army, grandfather was in the army, great-grandfather.
Well, now, a blast from the past. Bully is going to show me how to fire a genuine 200-year-old Brown Bess musket. These guns were notoriously inaccurate, so rather than picking out specific targets, a large number of artillerymen would all fire at once, delivering a hail of musket balls into the enemy lines. Some were bound to hit home.
Cool. That's something, isn't it? I think I got him. Oh, yes. These Frenchies, you know. We can take them on.
Now I'm going upmarket and super modern. This is a version of the latest sniper rifle used by today's army.
Squeeze the trigger very gently.
Gosh, that's a big one, isn't it? I think I've got it.
Not that one.
Right, the moment of truth. Did I even hit the target?
Right, well, now, look, this is my target. How have I done? That's good.
This is the old Brown Bess. You get your finger right in it, so you hit the target at 100 yards.
That's pretty good.
That's very good. I've got to say, this is all that sniper rifle. That's very, very good.
Is it?
Very good.
Is it really?
For the first time ever to shoot with a scope with that rifle.
Oh, please don't go on, Bully. No, please don't go on. But you're embarrassing me now.
Give me a fiver.
Okay.
That's very good.
I'm rather pleased with that. That's not half bad. And I can't resist a photo souvenir.
It is. It's my target shot, but I'm very, very proud of it, and I want everybody to appreciate it. Right, here we go.
Never mind, Frith. This is me, on the range, on target, on song.
And the bit I like is that one up there, because that was fired by a gun which could have fired at the Battle of Waterloo. And of course, if it had been down there, who knows? Might have got Napoleon.
Next time on Britain's First Photo Album, I shall be on the Isle of Wight, hunting for a missing coastline. I'll be using a Frith photo to prove that Stonehenge has not been as we know it for as long as we think. And I'll be toasting the breweries of Hampshire.
You like another?
We'll have another 3, I think.
Next on BBC Two, Michael Portillo looks at what happened after the fighting was over. Railways of the Great War, coming up.